Hello everyone, my name is Hannah Collison from Inspired Creations Surrey School of Sugarcraft, and here is a tutorial on introduction to buttercream piping. We're going to work on 6 cupcakes today, making 6 different pipe designs just using a few piping tips. Here is an image of the cupcakes that we're going to be making. If you would like to work alongside, then this is a list of the items that you will need to set up. And if I just scroll down, then you'll find that this is a list of the colours, the quantity and the colours that you will need to prepare in advance of the lesson. And of course, if you have any questions or you'd like to see what other classes we do, either virtually or in person, then feel free to get in touch through the contact details on this leaflet. Okay, so first things first, when you make the buttercream, we need to make sure that it's the right consistency. So if you would like, we can email you the recipe we like to use, but effectively I'm using half the quantity of a block butter to double the quantity of icing sugar, and that gives you a nice consistency which will actually spread onto a cake, or you can use for piping. Now, you need to test that the buttercream will actually move quite comfortably using a knife. So I'm just stirring this, and you've got something that is probably resembling slightly thicker than whipped double cream. So toothpaste consistency would be a good guide. So just mixing this through, making sure that it's nice and air stirred in, nice and soft all the way through, and also fairly air bubble free. And the idea of that is that it'll give you a smoother piping. So you can see in here that there's some bubbles, and you want to just smooth those out before you go ahead and bag this up. Now to colour, if you're wanting to colour your buttercream, then you can use any kind of paste or gel colour. I'm using the spectral colours from Sugar Flare, but you can use any of the different brands. The one you want to avoid is the pot of really watery colour that comes that's probably in your cupboard from when your gran used to do some cake decorating, so avoid that if you can. And then all we do is use a cocktail stick just to take a little scoop of the colour out, and that will go into your buttercream, and then you're ready to stir it around to combine the colour and get a nice kind of depth to your colour. And of course, depending on how much you put in will depend on how loose that makes the buttercream, so just take a bit of care there. If you need to, if your buttercream is too firm, then you can put it in the microwave for a few seconds, and that way it'll just loosen it off. But bear in mind that probably on a defrost setting for 2 or 3 seconds will be enough to make it loose enough to work with. Avoid overdoing, otherwise you're going to have to throw it away if it goes melty. If you find it's too soft because you're working with it in a very hot environment, then you can put it in the fridge to cool it down a little bit, and then go ahead and stir it again until you've got the right consistency to work with. Once you are happy with the consistency of your buttercream, and this quantity here, which is 200 grams, I'm quite happy with that. I've just been mixing it. I'm not trying to beat it. I don't want to add air into it, but the idea is just to get it nice and mixed up and get the air out of it. And then I've got a little square of cling film here, and I'm going to put that, leaving a little gap at the end so we can twist it closed. I'm just going to put that in a bit of an oblong or sausage shape along the cling film. And what we're going to do is we're going to prepare some purple in the same way as we've just done the white. And that's going to go as a strip, a little sausage on the top. And that gives us a dual buttercream. And of course, if you wanted to, you could actually have 3 colours in this if you prefer. So here I have my purple. Let's move that up a bit so you can see. So I'm just going to stir the purple in the same way as I did the white. That'll be quite a drying colour because of the E numbers that's in there. So just be aware of that. It might affect the consistency of your buttercream. And there's never a case where I add more water. I only put a bit of water or flavouring in at the very beginning of making the buttercream, so that the consistency, so that it actually allows you to mix everything together all the ingredients combine. If then I need to adjust it, I don't add any more water or add any more icing sugar, because the recipe is the perfect consistency that you need. So what you would do is just either heat it in the microwave or in a bain-marie, so a saucepan, and just balance your glass bowl in that, just to warm the buttercream up a little bit, and refrigerate. Okay, so heat, hot and cold is how I adjust the buttercream, rather than adding more water or more icing sugar. So the idea here is just to get this to kind of laid as a sausage on top of the white. We don't have to be too fussy. It's just going to give us a nice dual colour to get the rest out of the pot. Now, what we're going to do now is take both ends and bring them together. So both ends, bring them together, and then just roll those ends down, so you're enclosing the buttercream within the cling film. And then you can twist both ends to create a sausage. Now, all the other colours that I have, yellow, green, brown, pink, they're all going to be put into separate wraps of cling film as sausage pieces, but they won't be two-tone. We've just got the pink in a wrap and the yellow in the wrap, and so on. The cling film wrap size, the square, is about 25 centimetres or 10 inches square. It doesn't really matter if it's a little bit smaller than that. You just want something that can fit. This is obviously only a tiny amount of buttercream, so we've probably got a bit more cling film than we need here. It happens to be the cling film that I use to cover the pot with. So when I load, or I'm ready to load all my buttercream up, or when I'm ready to colour, what I do is I tend to start with colouring the white buttercream, and then I go ahead and I colour the yellow and then the green, and that way you don't have to clean the knife in between, because there is yellow in green. You start with the natural buttercream, and that's absolutely fine. And then I probably only need to clean my pot and my knife in between finishing the green loading up, colouring and loading up, and starting to colour the pink, because of course if you combine pink with green, it's going to go brown. If you do your brown last, again, you don't need to colour anything, you don't need to wash anything up, which is very handy. Okay, so this is my last colour, and I just again bring the ends together at the top here, and then you can roll the ends down to seal your buttercream sausage in, and then twist both sides so they're nice and tight. Okay, so now we've got all our colours ready. I'm going to show you how to load the bags. To prepare the bags, you've got a couple of methods. Often, well, almost all the time, for the smaller piping tips, the normal standard piping tips, I use a coupler. And the best way to work out where to cut the end of the bag is to push. I've just unscrewed this part here, and then I push the funnel end of the coupler down as tight into the bag as I possibly can. And there's a cutout U shape on the coupler, and if you use that as a guide and score at the bottom of that U shape, which is under where the thread works, and having scored that, if you then push the coupler out of the way and cut across where you've made your score mark, cut the back into place, you should find that that will actually then stop the plastic where the U end is. Then you can interchange your piping tips. So we can start off with a small standard piping number 2, and all we need to do is, once you've put the tip on, is actually twist the coupler on to secure, and that way then you are not going to have any buttercream coming out of the bag. And also it means that if you've got a certain colour in here and you want to use 4 or 5 different piping tips using that colour, then you just simply interchange the piping tip when you're ready. The other option you might find is if you haven't got enough couplers, you would then want to put the piping tip directly into the bag. And the idea here is to position the piping tip right to the end of the bag. And then if you have a look to where just under halfway is on that piping tip, and you'd cut a snip with your scissors, which would then give you a cutting guideline where to cut across, so that when you push your piping tip in, it doesn't come out of the end by any further than halfway. That way, the pressure you might need to apply shouldn't make the piping tip pop out. For the larger piping tips, you can actually get a coupler. They're huge in comparison to the normal size. And for me, I find them very cumbersome, so I don't really normally use this. What I normally do is just simply place the big piping tip over the bag. Imagine what it would look like if the piping tip was coming to a point, and then come back a little way. So I've got a bit of a gap here to start with. And then I would work out just where under halfway is on my piping tip, make a cut line, and then cut straight across. That way then you can load up your piping tip and push it through, and you should find that it will either come it's okay if it comes anywhere from here up to about halfway. So mine's ending there, and the only thing you've got to watch out is that it is completely clear of those openings there, because you don't want the plastic to stop the pattern from coming out. If you feel there's not enough cut off, then you can just simply go back, push the piping tip back out, and then reposition the piping tip and check that you're happy. So I think that's probably as safe. It's at least 1 centimetre away from the deepest cut there. Okay, so now I've got all my piping tips added. We've got the big one, that's the 2D, then we have a 352, a 104, a number 18 or a Wilton number 12, and this one's a number 2. So those are the piping tips we're going to use. We'll start by showing you how to load the dual colour. So this is the purple and the yellow, the purple and the natural colour that we've loaded up into our cling film. We've wrapped it down on the top here and swiddled the ends. So you can just pick one of those ends and cut it open. That's the end that's actually going to go into the piping bag. Open up the piping bag and drop the buttercream in. Okay, and you can give it just one little sharp little tug, just shake it down into the bottom there, and then that piping bag is ready to use. Okay, so that's gone in there, and the nice thing about this is that when you've finished, you can just pull the cling film wrapped buttercream excess out of the bag, and then you've only got a little area here which will have buttercream on it. You have then the choice to wash the bag up, as well as the piping tip and the couplers. The bags themselves, although they're described as disposable, you can actually just turn them inside out and wash them. And if you position them up on your counter just to let them dry overnight, then you'll find that you can reuse them 2 or 3 times before you need to throw them away. At the moment, I haven't really found a good alternative for cling film, so unfortunately we still need to use the cling film, but at least we're reusing the bags a few times anyway. Okay, so here are all my bags prepared. You can get bands to seal them up. You can use just a freezer click if you would like, but if you have these bands, then they're quite handy. If you just scooch up the end of the bag here where the buttercream stops, and this has got a little tab on it, so stretch it behind the bag and then overlap the tab. You just make sure that the buttercream's all pressed down, and that will seal your bag. But to be honest, you can work with this without any kind of seal on it. To give you a bit of an idea of how I like to hold the bag, I'm holding it left-handed, but if you're right-handed, you hold it in your right hand. So the idea here is to squeeze the buttercream into the end so that it is about to come out of your piping tip, and make sure that you've got as much of that buttercream as low as possible in the bag so it's nice and plump. I then put the bag into this part of my hand between my finger and thumb, so into this part here, close it up, And then the tail end of the bag can wrap around my pointing finger and lock into between my finger and thumb. Twist the bag until it feels plump, and then you shouldn't need much more than a minimal squeeze here to let the buttercream come out. To practice cupcakes, if you want to, you can actually use dummy cupcakes, and they're just plastic. They come in a set of 12, and you just need to put a little bit of masking tape over the hole so that the buttercream doesn't go into the cupcake and cause a problem when you come to clean. So the first one I'm going to show you is a rosette. The idea here is to start off with your 2D, with your dual coloured buttercream, and we're going to create a star having raised the tip for about a centimetre from the cake itself. So we squeeze to create a star, move up towards 12 o'clock, and then continuing the pressure and raising the piping tip, start to overlap as you circulate around the cupcake, keeping your piping tip at a 90-degree angle. And then when you're So the 2D can do a lot more, but I just want to show you how it can make a little hydrangea flower or blossom flower. So the idea with the piping bag is that you do hold it 90 degrees, so perpendicular to the surface you're piping on. And if you have a little bit of a distance, a little bit of a gap between yourself and the board, you can actually squeeze, or yourself and the cupcake, you can actually squeeze, make contact, and you can draw upwards as you're squeezing, and you'll create a little star shape. If you wish to create more of a flower shape, if you have the same gap, squeeze, make contact, stop squeezing, relax the pressure, and then come off. And what that will do is give you a flower just with a bit where you can pipe a centre. If you want to, you can actually place the piping tip directly onto the surface of the board, and if you squeeze, it will give you a flattened, punched flowers. Relax the pressure and bring the piping tip out slowly, and you'll get something that looks a little bit flatter and more punched on, again with a hole in the middle for you to put a stamen of some sort. The last one I'm going to show you is actually where you make a more flat petal just on the cupcake or cake. And the idea here is that you hold, instead of holding your piping bag 90 degrees with a straight wrist, if you bring your wrist in a little bit, sorry, I know this is a bit close, and then the idea is as you're piping, you hold the piping tip on the surface and you unravel your wrist so it becomes straight again. So you go from 90 degrees closed up, unravel to open. And how that looks, let me just show you. So I've got my wrist bent. I've got my wrist bent. I've got my piping tip on the surface, and I'm going to squeeze, keeping it on the surface, keep the pressure squeezing, get some of the size of the petal out, and then I'm opening up my wrist so that it becomes straight. Relax the pressure and come off, and you've got this really lovely blossom flower that's open. So we can go from star to just like a hydrangea two-tone flower, to something that looks more punched, to something that looks more open. So there's quite a lot of options here. For my cupcake, I'm going to pipe in little hydrangea flowers because we're just going to make a little dome of hydrangeas. So the idea here, it doesn't matter which way you hold your bag, you're going to get the two-tone coming out. So literally straight wrist here. Okay, and then I'm making sure that I've got all the buttercream nice and twisted to the bottom of the bag, and you can hold on to the cupcake and start to squeeze. So squeeze, relax the pressure, come off, and that will give you a flower. And then we can turn the cupcake a little bit. I can put another one slightly off center, squeeze, and come off. So your bag is 90-degree angle to the surface that you're piping on. That's important. And I'm about ½ centimetre away from the surface with my squeezing. So initially, I'm going to just fill in the whole surface of the cupcake. And if you wanted, you could stop there. Or if you want a bit more of a dome shape, then you can continue the piping in the same way, building up more flowers partly into the center, and then maybe one more just to make it a little bit more domed shape. So now we've got all these beautiful little blossoms. To make these blossoms more flower-like, I'm going to use the number 2 piping tip with my yellow. So the number 2 is just a very fine writer. Again, hold the bag the way I've shown you, give it a twist, and then it's nice and plump so you haven't got too much pressure going through your wrist. So just position the piping tip where you'd like the yellow to come out, and then just simply squeeze out a little dot. Find the center of each flower and continue to fill in all the dots. Okay, so now each blossom has got a little center stamen. I'm going to show you how to use the leaf tip now. This has my green buttercream in it, so I'll just scooch all the green down, give that a little wrap around my fingers and twist so that I've got minimal pressure coming through my wrist. The leaf tip is a great tip. It will make different types of leaves, different size as well. You can buy different size tips, but you can do a lot with just the 352. You want to make sure though that the V that's cut in is actually sideways, like a beak on an opening bird. Okay, if it's the other way, if it's sideways, if it's that way, so you've got the beak top and bottom, that's not going to work. So you've got to make sure that that cut is on the side of whatever you're doing. When I pipe, just turn this a little bit more, just tighten it. When I pipe a leaf, I put the surface of the pointy end of the bottom point onto whatever I'm piping. So the end of the piping tip onto the surface that I'm piping. And then I don't move until I've squeezed it to get however wide I want my leaf. And I keep the pressure on as I'm drawing backwards so that I create a leaf. And when you come off, you come off gently. So this one was kind of up a little bit in an angle. I just positioned it like so and came off at a 45-degree angles, and that's lifted the leaf. You can make them so that they just travel and stick to the surface completely, so something like this. Or if you want more texture, if you squeeze and then push in and out, you will get some beautiful textures. So you can start to see how you can make ferns and other textured leaves. If you judder backwards and forwards quite a lot as you travel, you'll find that you'll get a lovely texture. And of course, you can do larger ones and smaller ones. A little bit later on, we're going to be doing the sunflower, so you'll be making larger ones then. So that leaf technique is fantastic because you can use it for all the blossoms that you've created. So for example, we've got a little blossom here, and that would look quite nice with a little leaf on the edge. So following that theme, if I bring my cupcake back in with all my hydrangea leaves, petals, I can go ahead and randomly pipe little leaves. And I'm picking areas where there's a gap, but also what I'm trying to do is not have the piping tip in the same direction. And that way it just looks a little less, a bit more natural, not as haphazard, a bit more haphazard, not as uniform. So we've got some leaves on the outside. And then if I try and identify where the edge of the petals are that I've created, I can go ahead and put some more foliage in to give it more interest. So it's how you can start to build up a garden of buttercream piped cupcakes. Another piping tip that is very popular is the 104, or it also comes in smaller sizes, 103, 102, and so on. And this is made for petals. It will make rose petals as well. And I think it's by far the hardest piping tip to work with. The key to remember with this is that the fat end of the piping tip must be placed onto the surface at all times. The narrow end is always outermost because that's what creates the narrow part of the petal, the thin edge of the petal. If you have it the other way and you're getting thick ends, thick edges to your petals, then you'll realize that you've got it the wrong way around, unless that's something you want. So the idea here is that we put the fat end onto the surface of the board. You have a 45-degree angle. So if you're right-handed, you'll be holding it the other way. Okay, 45-degree angle, holding in your right hand. But the other thing to remember here is not only have you got this angle here, you've also got the angle 45 degrees here as well. So if I just show you a side profile that way, and also you've got, can you see the angle of the piping tip? So it's not up. If it's flat, you'll get a very flat petal. So it's kind of in the middle, 45 degrees. So this one can do a lot. It can create petals. I'll just show you a couple of petals. So we're going to squeeze, turn. So I'm really moving the board rather than the piping bag at this stage. Relax the pressure and come off. A bit like a windscreen wiper. So the fat end stays stationary. Your bag doesn't move. You're going to move the cupcake or the practice board, whatever you're working on. Relax the pressure and come off. So that's a good little practice to start with if you're not sure how to work the piping tip. The next thing is that I can show you on this is that it will actually do a ruffle. So we'll just start by squeezing. So again, I'm keeping the fat end on the surface, 45-degree angle with the bag and a 45-degree angle with the piping tip. And as I pipe, I can wiggle up and down, but also travel sideways. And you can see it's creating a ruffle. Thin end, that's the fat end and the bottom end. If you wanted to, you could go back to the beginning then. You could do the same thing again. So if you squeeze in and out, so backwards and forwards, I'm doing a backwards and it's like a zigzag. And that will give you a double ruffle. And you can see how that would work this way on a cake, as much as it would work this way on a cake. Okay, so using one of my other dummy cupcakes, I'm actually going to show you how to make the ruffle turn into just a simple carnation design that can go onto your cupcake. And with this one, you start on the outside edge and you work your way towards the center. So just make sure that you've got a nice plump bag so that you haven't got to apply too much pressure, because it's a big bag, so it's going to end up and making you press quite firm. 45-degree angle on your bag, 45-degree angle on your tip, or you could have it slightly more laid down. And we're just going to do that ruffle effect backwards and forwards, so out and in until you get to the beginning again. So you've created one round. At this point, I'm just going to twist the bag to tighten. Remember always the fat end is going to be down, and on this particular design the fat end is not only down, it's also on the inside, so towards the center of the cupcake. And the idea here again is to only zigzag in and out with the piping tip, but your finger is going to turn the cupcake. Okay, so in and out as we go around, creating a ruffle effect. It's kind of a carnation, a messy flower. So that's your second round. Then we can go again. Just make sure, if you can, just to keep the piping tip nice and clean, because that can get yourself into a bit of a mess. So now what I'm having to do to avoid crashing into this layer is actually bring up my piping tip angle a little bit. So a bit more upright, but zigzag still as before. So that creates another layer. And then I'm going to have it almost pretty much upright and just squiggle in the center. So as you get to the middle, the flower petals are a bit more closed up. When you're ready to come off, just stop the pressure, give it a little wiggle to help it release, and then you should be able to come off without tearing it. So that is your carnation or ruffle design for a cupcake. So the next one I'm going to show you is actually it's a bit like a daisy. It's quite a nice one, this. And it's following on from me showing you how this petal works, but you're actually going to move the piping tip up and back again. So you create like a narrow petal, like so. So plant the fat end of the piping tip onto the surface, 45-degree angle on your bag here, and 45-degree angle on the tip. And then all you're going to do is planting the fat end towards the center of the cupcake. We're going to trace and draw out and come back in. So draw out and come back in, draw out and come back in. So it gives you an elongated petal in effect. So it's another little easy technique you can use. I'll show you what that looks like on a cupcake. So this is going to be a pink flower, a pink like daisy-like flower. So it does help if you just put a little bit of buttercream in the center. So I can use just a little dot from my yellow there because I've got a number 2 piping tip, a little writing piping tip on there. And then just make sure that all your buttercream is scooped as low down in the bag as possible so that it's easier to handle. Personally, I find it difficult if there's too much buttercream in the bag. I'd rather reload rather than overload. Just make sure that tapes over there. I've got my little dot in the middle and that's going to be my guide. So my first petals, my first set of petals, don't need to be right up against that dot. That's just a bit of a guide. So I can start my piping about here. So squeeze fat end on the surface here, 45-degree angle here and on the piping tip. So bags at 45 degrees. And then we just start to pipe out elongated petals that go to the edge or just over the edge. And these can be as long as you like. So if you make them super long, then you don't have to make as many petals. Okay, so that's your first petal layer. Then when we come in a little bit, we can, the next point idea here is to actually elongate the petals so it starts from the center dot you've made and overlaps, but comes in a little way from the edge. So fat end down towards the point that you've piped with the yellow, squeeze, draw out and come back. Squeeze, draw out and come back. Squeeze, and so on. And that is giving you purposeful petals rather than just a squiggle or a ruffle. Now in the center, what you can do, if we move our little number 2 piping tip, the writer, and swap it for a 12 or an 18, which is a big hole, we can make a little center, a purposeful center, and we're going to use this technique for our sunflower in a moment, which will be our last flower. So holding this at a 90-degree angle, we're just going to squeeze into the center to build up a little blob. When you've got the blob size you want, just relax the pressure, wobble it just a little bit, and then come off sideways. And that's giving you a little dot in the center. So you could, if you wanted to, stop there. Or I've got a little sample of one here, which is a white cupcake, and I've done the blob in the center, and then I've used the number 2 just to put little dots on, and that just gives it a little bit more interest. Okay, I'll show you the dots on the sunflower. Okay, so the sunflower is actually my favorite, and we've kept the best till last, and we're going to start off using the leaf piping tip. Just scooch all the buttercream down to the bottom of the bag as best you possibly can, and make sure you're starting off with a fairly clean piping tip so that it makes it easy to manage and you don't get yourself into a mess. The idea here is to start off by creating a surrounding edge of wide leaves. So we're squeezing and drawing back. So remember, the beak, like V opening in the piping tip, needs to be on the side like a beak of a bird. Position the tip, the bottom tip, onto the surface of the cupcake, and then you squeeze, staying still until you've got the width of the leaf that you would like. And then when you've got the width, you can keep the squeezing pressure but travel slowly backwards, and when you get towards the end, still squeeze but come off gently so that you don't break the tip. So tip on the surface, squeeze to get the width, travel backwards, keeping the pressure, relax the piping a little bit and gently come off. So when you are coming off, you are squeezing just a little bit, not full squeeze. So we're just going to work our way all the way around the cupcake. Like so. So the idea now would be to swap that piping tip onto our yellow. But before we do that, I need to put a brown centre in the middle. Now you could do the brown centre first. That might have been a better idea, but it doesn't matter at this stage as long as you realise that you've got to do it. So I'm just going to take the number 18 or 12 off my yellow, move that onto my brown. Now if you're concerned, you can squeeze the excess around, but you can see here that I've got a bit of yellow coming through. So if I didn't want that, I can just scrape that off into my pot. That's fine. Okay. So 90-degree angle to the cupcake, squeeze, make contact and squeeze, and you want quite a big blob coming out. And I know I'm going to use this to create brown dots in a moment. When you've got the size of the center that you want, wiggle, having relaxed the pressure, and then come off sideways so you don't end up with too much of a peak. So at the moment we've got an off-centered dome, but that's fine because it's going to be hidden by the yellow bracts. So I'm just going to swap out my green leaf tip, the 352s, going onto my yellow now. Scooch all the buttercream down to the bottom, give it a good twist, and then you're ready to go. So now there's 2 further layers to go on here. So you can start to aim to make contact with the center that you've piped. Initially, there'll be green coming through because you were using the piping tip for the green, the back of the sunflower. And now the yellow's coming through. Now when we're piping, I'm making a choice to actually pipe in between the 2 bracts or leaves, petals, whatever you want to call them, so that they don't look like they're fully overlapping. It just makes it more interesting if you position them like brickwork. So once you've done that, you can continue and go back round again, and this final layer will definitely make contact with that center that you've made. And they don't necessarily have to be as big as the other layer. So again, like brickwork, make these pipe in between the ones you've previously piped so that you get all the petals showing. So I've gone back to my number 2 piping tip, but I've put it onto my brown because I want to put some dots onto the center here now to make it look like seeds. Okay, so again, scooch all the buttercream down to the bottom of the bag so that you haven't got too much effort to squeeze. And if you'll notice, I've got yellow coming through. So I'm just going to squeeze that out. I'm just going to squeeze that out into my pot. I don't normally wash my piping tips in between colours. I just squeeze out, and then after a while of squeezing, you'll find that it'll come out brown. So here this just means that we've got 1 ripe dot, or if we want to, we can actually overpipe that in a moment, depending on how this centre looks. So if you start around the outside edge, then you can give yourself more of a defined ring, a circle. It's a bit easier to do it if you follow the outline first. So just get yourself a ring of dots. And then you can go ahead and do a second ring, a third ring, and so on until you get to the center. And this is a number 2 piping tip. And what I'm doing is I'm putting the piping tip 90 degrees to the surface that I'm piping on. I squeeze, keeping the nozzle in the buttercream. And then when I'm finished, I just relax the pressure, give it a little wiggle and come off. So I don't end up with lots of points. At this stage, this being a beginner class, it doesn't matter. What you'll find though is if you have got peak dots that you don't like, then all you need to do is use a dampened brush and just touch the peaks of those dots and they will flatten. So now we've got, you can see I've got some peaks on there, but now we've got this seed-like look in the center of our sunflower. And here are the 6 cupcakes you've just done. So we've got the rosette, we've got a blossom flower using the 104. We have the Mr. Whippy, which is using the 2D, the same as the rosette. The sunflower using the 352, the 12, and the number 2. You've got the hydrangea little dome of flowers, which is using the 2D 352 and the number 2. And then you've got the 104 that made your little carnation flower. So I hope you've enjoyed this session, and if you have any questions, please do feel free to get in touch and have a look at what other courses we've got, because we've got a few other piping classes that may be of interest to you. Look forward to seeing you again soon. You take care. Bye bye.